Welcome, everyone, to the second week of the Global Plant-Forward Culinary Summit, the virtual edition. I'm Jacqueline Shee, Director of Programs and Special Projects for the Strategic Initiatives Group here at the CIA, and I'm Program Co-Director for this virtual series, along with Anne McBride, who you may have seen in week one, and who you'll see a little bit later in the program as well. We had an amazing launch to this virtual event a week ago with a sold out audience and many more joining us through the live stream and recorded webcast. If you joined us for week one, welcome back. And if you didn't join us for week one, don't worry. You can catch up on all of the great content on our website at plantforwardkitchen.org. As with many of you, we at the CIA had to quickly adjust our conference models to the new social distancing guidelines. But we're so excited that this pivot means we're able to reach many more people than we previously would have. We're especially grateful to our program sponsors who have made this possible, including our premium gold sponsor, Unilever, our gold sponsors, Google Food, the National Peanut Board, Nestle Professional, and Oatly, as well as our bronze corporate and media sponsors. Their sustained support of our Plant-Forward initiative, despite significant upheaval throughout the food industry, enables us to bring this programming to you tuition-free, and we hope you'll make a point of engaging with them during the networking breaks and in the expo booths throughout the summit. Before we dive into this week's content, a reminder that you can access all of the presentations and recipes on our website with the email that we sent with the password that was in the email we sent to registered attendees earlier this week. Additionally, one of the things that distinguishes this summit from other webinars you might be participating in is that we really tried to build an environment that still helps you connect and network with your peers and industry colleagues in real time. You can search for anyone using the People tab and invite them to a direct video chat. And we've also built in some really unique interactive opportunities, which we'll review a little bit later. Additionally, we'd love to hear what's going on in your operations. So we've built out some polls in the polls feature, which we'll be coming back to throughout today's sessions. In fact, our first poll is up and running. And let me do a quick check on the results. We asked you, what is your favorite technique for boosting umami in a plant-forward dish? And it looks like incorporating umami-rich ingredients like seaweed, mushrooms, tomatoes, and anchovies and other ingredients has just pulled ahead just by a bit above searing, grilling, and other techniques. Fermentation is still a little bit behind. So if you're a fan of fermentation, make sure that you go over there and make your opinion known in the poll. We're going to be checking back at those results in a little bit, so make sure you get your 2 cents in. So in week one, we heard from leading chefs about how Plant-Forward continues to have relevance, even as many of us are confronting a more immediate crisis in the coronavirus pandemic. Hearing from a wide variety of chefs across the food service spectrum, we talked about the larger environmental and public health imperatives for why Plant-Forward matters. For me, one of the standout moments was hearing Dominique Kren tell us that we can't lose focus of doing the right thing, even in this moment. We just have to learn how to navigate around these new challenges. This week, we're diving deeper into real strategies around successful plant-forward practices, including umami development and how to highlight value within plant-forward dishes. We'll also hear from honorees from our CIA FSR Plant-Forward Watchlist who are signaling leadership and propelling profit through their plant-forward offerings. To kick things off, I'd like to welcome to the stage Ali Bouzari, a culinary scientist, author, educator, and also co-founder of Pilot R&D, a culinary research and development company, and Render, a food company that collaborates with the best restaurant chefs in the country to reinvent the way food lovers eat. Ali is no stranger to our CIA Thought Leadership conferences, and this time he's guiding us through the principles of plant-forward umami. So now that first poll probably feels even more relevant. Welcome to the stage, Ali.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well, thank you. Just a reminder for the audience, we will have time for Q&A with Ali following the presentation. So feel free to submit your questions at any time in the chat function on your right-hand side. Meanwhile, I'm gonna let you have the spotlight, Ali, so take it away.
Hi, people. How's it going? Let us get weird. So like Jackie mentioned, my background, if you're not familiar with it, is a bit of a hybrid. So I am equal parts scientist and chef. I used to teach at the CIA for the past decade or so. I've gotten the amazing opportunity to collaborate with really incredible chefs all around the world and basically help them answer whatever questions are rattling around in the back of their minds. In the most recent years, I'd say in the past 5 years, through Pilot, we've had the opportunity to do the same thing, sort of be on the other end of the red phone in case of emergency for food companies. And so it's really interesting to see how chefs in the upper echelon of the culinary world and how startups, established food companies, and everybody else on the complete opposite side of the spectrum are all reckoning with the same question of how do we plants? How do plants figure into our lives? And I should say plants is a probably irresponsibly biologically imprecise term. Everything non-animal. So not just plants, but fungi and all kinds of microbes and things like that. But how do these things relate to one another? And how do we reckon with them? And I think the culinary world and the food service / retail packaged foods world are coming at it with some shared themes, but I think, as always, there's a little bit more nimbleness and innovation in the chef side of things. So I will often reference what chefs are doing because, frankly, there's just more to talk about. There is more new happening quicker in the culinary world that inevitably makes it over to food service, CPG, et cetera. So plants and animals is kind of a weird debate. The tissues, the starting materials that we use for cooking are just so wildly different. I say this a lot because animals and plants use their tissues for different stuff. To interact with and communicate with the environment, animals will yell at you. They will charge you. They'll change their posture. Animal interaction with daily life is based on movement. Plant interaction with daily life is based on basically chemical warfare. Every bit of communication from a plant, whether it's a warning to stay away, an enticing mating ritual, or anything in between, is based on chemicals that are providing color, taste, aroma, texture. It's a chemical language. And so what that means is the remains of those things, of either animal tissue or plant tissue, is reflective of that thing's ability to communicate when it was alive. So as an ingredient, meat is really stupid. It's delicious, it's fantastic, but it is really rudimentary. It's basically bundles of proteins that were intended for movement. And so they have very, very simple functions. They're fairly easy to manipulate. They're chemically relatively very simple. Plants are just this incredible spectrum where all of those pieces of chemical machinery that were left over for storing energy, for communicating with allies, for communicating with enemies, all of that stuff carries flavors. It carries taste, aroma, it impacts texture. And so the palette of colors that we have to paint with plants, just purely chemically speaking, is a iridescent rainbow compared to the gray slab that is meat. That gray slab is a really great foundation. It's really important, but it can't do quite as much different stuff as what plants can do. So we're at an interesting inflection point right now where those who are advocates of weeding meat out of the equation completely, I think are making really incredible strides in turning plant proteins. If the goal is to serve someone a hunk of plant protein is now probably more convincingly meaty than it ever has been in human history, which is great. I say this frequently as well. I am very excited about the next phase. Once we have really great analogs for those who choose to seek them for hamburgers and chicken nuggets and whatever else there is, the plant work isn't done. We're going to move on to the next phase of exploring further all those different shades of the colors that plants can give us, and honestly, how to make plants taste really good as plants rather than forcing them into the mold of animals. Again, it's all relevant, but I'm excited about that next phase. I will say that we're going to talk a lot about umami in basically plant exclusive dishes for a lot of this talk, but my personal belief is in the flexitarian lifestyle of animals probably fit a really, really important role when they are used judiciously. And so a lot of what I'm interested in personal research is how do we increase the mileage that we get out of a chicken? How do we increase our MPC, mileage per chicken, where we're turning animals into condiments. We're using them very sparingly, and I'm talking about at fractions of the amounts that we're currently using to enhance plants. Setting that aside, let's talk about umami. So first of all, what is that? Umami is a basic taste. It is as a basic taste, it's hard to pinpoint because the way it manifests. So if you taste something sour, you're going to make the Sour Patch Kids face. You're going to pucker because it's a very sort of front of mind sensory experience. Umami is like edible 808s, which if you are not up on music in the past 20 years, are those really bassy, almost subsonic sounds that are in almost every type of music right now that underpin the rhythm of music and give it a general tone and a drive to go in a direction. But it's not the melody. It's not necessarily having the spotlight shown on it. And that is one of the reasons why umami, in the way we talk about it, tends towards mysticism, like vague mythical language. We started interacting with umami, at least in this country, mostly in junk food. And so for a lot of people, looking at packaged foods in various iterations, there was distrust of umami that, coupled with, surprise, surprise, some racism, caused umami to have a bit of a stutter step when it started in the United States as part of a conversation around food. From there, umami became this thing where in the peak of the phrase ethnic food, it was like when you got to learning the cuisines of Vietnam, that's when the conversation about umami started. When you're talking about Japan or Nigeria or Peru, umami figured into those conversations, but it wasn't really a meat and potatoes conversation for continental cooking, which is, of course, absurd. In the most recent years, the chef world has adopted umami in, I don't know, various streaks and colors of like bro-y extreme culture of talking about umami bombs and Dorito coated in Doritos and then fried in Dorito oil, just in excess. The reality is that umami is just, it's mundane. It is a component of every single thing that you have ever cooked or eat. It was part of, human mother's milk has a ton of free glutamate. We are trained for umami from the crib, regardless of where we're from. And I think the number one thing to remember about umami is that it is simple. It is elusive because it operates in the background and it's an undertone, but it is universal and it's simple. It's not Japanese. It's not Nigerian. It's not French. It's a universal human experience. Umami chemically comes from this illustration is a rendering of protein. Basically, if you break a protein apart, chances are one of those building blocks, one of those links in the chain is going to be glutamic acid. Glutamic acid in the presence of any kind of salt, specifically sodium, but any salt from any source will give you MSG, which elicits probably the flagship umami response. So like you have acids give us sourness, salts give us saltiness, sugars give us sweetness. Glutamate is one of the pillars of umami. There are others, scraps of genetic material, nucleotides like guanylate and inosinate. Those are helpers. They're helper molecules to help basically amplify the signal of glutamate and MSG, regardless of where it's coming from. But again, umami doesn't need to be this mystical thing. It's like saying, sourness. We also don't understand. There's still a lot we haven't figured out about sourness, but nobody is writing a long form article for the New Yorker about the ancient secrets of vinegar from the Persian Empire. Sourness is sour. It's there. Umami is umami. It's there. So how do we get umami? How do we break things down into these fundamental building blocks? There's a few different ways. The one that's probably the most famous is microbial. So whether you're going for a little shaker of pure MSG or you're having something more traditional like shoyu, using microbes as machinery to break down proteins and generate umami is probably the form of umami that people are most familiar with. Now, that can be applied to animal-based substrates. It can be applied to plant-based substrates. It, again, is a fundamental part of food, which is why it is so universal. The second form or way of achieving umami is, rather than microbiology, this isn't really a word, but like macrobiology, allowing organisms, the food itself, to generate umami for us. So whether that's kelp hanging out in the ocean, generating amazing amounts of glutamate, or it's a tomato that maybe we dry farm, depriving it of water, thereby concentrating the amount of umami that the tomato is providing into a smaller and more potent package. Or even things like matcha. Matcha tea is actually put through a pretty intense set of biological training where the leaves of the tea plants for matcha are shaded to deprive them of a certain amount of UV food for them to use for photosynthesis, which changes their metabolism and actually makes them pump up their production naturally of glutamate. So you get a more savory, more rich, and full-bodied matcha. So after the macrobiological side of things, there's pure chemistry. So breaking apart those links in the chain can happen with microbes. It can happen with just plant metabolism or animal metabolism. It can also happen just with a crazy amount of acid or alkali that strips those protein chains of pearls apart into their individual building blocks, which this is how any amino acid seasoning. I don't know if you all have tried coconut aminos. That's basically protein and sap from coconut palm that has been subjected to a really intense chemical cooking process. That's how like Maggi seasoning and all of those really fundamental dark like liquid seasonings. If they're not going about it using microbes, one of the ways that it's produced is basically cooking with acid. The last opportunity for generating umami or strategy for doing it is using enzymes. So I want to clarify that whether you're using microbes or you're relying on a tomato to manufacture your umami for you, they are doing that via enzymes. There's enzymes are the little invisible robots that are doing everything in every living cell. And enzymes are the tip of the spear for what's happening in fermentation, what's happening as things are growing on the vine. But you can also harvest enzymes, separate them from their living host, and unleash them on food products. So that's where, I don't know, everything from koji, which is actually growing up a mold to become an enzyme factory, killing that mold and allowing the zombie enzymes to roam around and break down proteins in basically anything you want to add them to like papaya extract and commercially isolated and purified like protease enzymes. Enzymes break stuff down. You can employ enzymes to break basically whatever you want to break down. And as long as there's a decent amount of protein, so it doesn't just have to be soybeans, it doesn't just have to be wheat. As long as there's a decent amount of protein, you should be able to harvest some umami from wherever you're looking. Okay, so great. We have some umami. How do we implement it? It's really important to remember that, like salt, umami is not a cure-all. Savoriness, glutamate, you can't just sprinkle it on anything and have it be a perfect dish, because flavor is not just based on what's going on in our taste buds. It's this confluence of every sense that you have, all of your memories, all of your cultural associations, your mood, whether you're hungover or not. All of those things are going to play into the success or failure of the sensory experience in a dish. And so similar to how crazy it would sound to say, yeah, just add more salt to any dish and it will automatically be better. That is a lot of the conversation around umami. And like any other sensory experience, umami can work really well. It can also be kind of jarring. There are some things that people with a given cultural association and a given context will find a lot of umami front and center to be a little bit off-putting. The same way that we don't want every dish to always be sour or always be bitter. So there's three general ways of implementing umami in plant-based cooking once you have it. Number one is basically using umami as a seasoning. And again, like in the poll, people were talking about adding either umami-rich ingredients or generating umami in some sort of condiment, adding it to a plant-based dish to basically add an extra axis, like a Z-axis, add a basement where you store all your funk to make the flavor a little bit deeper. That's basically making a roasted carrot savory. It's adding a dimension to a dish that already exists. It's a very simple approach, but it has a ton of different kinds of applications. The second general approach is one that I think is a hot button issue right now. Pairing umami with other meat associated sensory cues, basically to create an animal-like experience in the absence of animal products. So smoking, curing, grilling, aging, charring, all of that stuff that we associate with barbecue and charcuterie and aged meats, that stuff is umami adjacent, and it can help leave a trail of breadcrumbs for your brain to then cue in on the glutamate, the other umami-rich tasting molecules that you're actually investigating. But that itself doesn't carry umami. And so, Jackie, I want to talk to you about this when you get back, but grilling something actually has a pretty low likelihood of generating actual umami, like generating free amino acids that you're going to taste and perceive as umami. That doesn't mean that it's not valid. There's a lot of false attributions of stuff to umami, again, partially because umami sits in the background and sort of hypes up everything else in the sensory world. But charring, smoking, all of that sort of stuff is great for creating an ambiance around which your brain can appreciate umami, even if it doesn't generate glutamic acid that can hit your tongue specifically. So the last sort of point that I want to touch on is if we're going beyond just trying to recreate animal-like umami experiences, if we're going beyond just using umami as a seasoning, the forefront, the frontier of where we can go from here is cooking with it from the very get-go. So basically, version 1.0 of this would be follow the chef playbook. Start with koji, start with some sort of tasty ingredient, give it some exposure to temperature and time, and allow it to go to some sort of endpoint. Great. You've got an amazing condiment. You've got a barley miso. You've got a chickpea soy sauce. You've got all these wonderful things that can then be plugged into the 1.0 version of seasoning other stuff. Where I think we're going to get into some really cool new territory is if we use umami containing ingredients as the base for the kind of long, complex cooking processes that make cooking great. So rather than just adding umami-rich ingredients as a seasoning, incorporate it into the beginning of a dough and allow the pieces of protein and scraps of these umami-rich ingredients to change the way that dough is going to brown in the oven, to change the way it's going to bind onto flavor, to change the way it's going to retain and interact with moisture. I think we've come a long way from just sprinkling umami onto stuff at the end of the road. And when we start incorporating koji as a way to ferment stuff that eventually is going to go into a tempura mushroom brine or a tempura mushroom batter, that's when we start to explore umami as what it is. It's a building block. It's a starting point. It's not the culmination. It's not a flavor hack. By the way, abolish flavor hack as a phrase. It is a fundamental part of who we are and what we can do as cooks and consumers. And I think that's where I'm most excited to see things go, is taking umami and bringing it back on the terms of normal ingredients and the way that we cook, and see where things lead. So, hey, Jackie.
Hello, Ali. That seems like a great place. I love what you were saying about not thinking about umami as just a seasoning or as a flavor hack. Also, I feel like the purest scientist is coming out in you in terms of talking about umami and its full potential, which I love. We've already got some questions coming in, and staying on that scientific sort of level, I'm going to read this question because I want to make sure I don't actually get it wrong. So Chella is asking, is umami the flavor associated with the amino acid L-glutamate in the same way sweet is associated with sugars such as fructose?
Yes-ish. Umami is, so it's associated with free glutamate, which again, that string of proteins that I kept referring back to, you can have glutamic acid as one of the links in the chain, but that big chain of protein, you can imagine trying to cram that down into your taste bud. It's not actually going to reach and not actually going to elicit a signal. So you need to free it. Interestingly, glutamate by itself with no sodium anywhere specifically, it's weird. You should, if there's a way for people to try this at some point, it just kind of tastes mildly sour. It just kind of tastes very mildly acidic. When sodium, either in the form of glutamate, in the form of MSG, like sodium coupled with it and crystallized, or just if you sprinkle some salt on something, or if something just carries sodium naturally. If there is sodium anywhere around at the time that you are eating glutamic acid or glutamate, that is what elicits an MSG response, or a umami response, and that interaction is pretty weird and unique, and we're still figuring out how that works on a molecular biology perspective. But there are other molecules that play in. So inosine monophosphate and guanylate and some of these other molecules that I mentioned. And we're discovering more as the years go by. While they on their own aren't super recognizable, aren't quite the signature hook of MSG or of glutamic acid-based umami, they are amplifiers. And so a mixture of MSG by itself is, let's say it's a 1 in terms of umami. If you take that same amount and you sprinkle on a minuscule, like couple percent of inosinate or guanylate, these other umami helpers, it'll take that 1 to like a 4. So it's like true synergy. It's the Beatles. It's like John, Paul, Ringo, George, everybody individually was great. Together, they were so great that they had to stop playing music because people were literally going to die.
Literally dying.
It is the Beatles of flavor. Yeah.
I like that, the Beatles of flavor. So you're basically saying it's more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
You're putting it together, but it becomes more than what you would take individually from each of those things. So
to summarize, umami, yes, based on glutamate in the presence of sodium, but also there are various helper molecules that really amplify the experience of umami.
Awesome. Great. And to go from sort of that more esoteric science part, we've got another question asking about umami components in beans, as these are used in so many culinary applications, from burgers to miso. Can you kind of break that down in the very specific application of beans? And
I can make this really simple. It really boils down to protein. Beans, legumes, pulses, that whole category of stuff. The reason that miso, shoyu, fermented black beans, all of that stuff is based off legumes, is because they're reservoirs of protein, those like red chains of amino acids. So it's good fuel for the fire. There's a lot of it. You can break it down. Chances are that you'll get a lot of free glutamate out of it after you do it. They're fantastic, but there's nothing inherently beany about umami. It's just that those are a readily available, delicious, relatively easy to grow plant source of protein, which is one way to go about it.
Awesome. And just another reminder for the audience again that you can be, we've still got some time for questions in there, so feel free to keep adding those questions. I've got another one. You mentioned using umami from the very beginning in terms of building things. Bernard is asking, can we get an example of how you incorporate it in a dough?
Yeah, so I actually, in the era of COVID and everybody baking at home, I have a friend who has really been trying hard to do like the tartine style wild levain sourdough, and it's failed just miserably because of timing constraints and taking care of a small child and all this stuff. So has then pivoted to the Bon Appetit focaccia recipe, but has a terrible oven that for a lot of reasons is producing very pale, lackluster doughs. So we chatted about it, and he basically added like a couple dashes of soy sauce to the base of his dough, not necessarily to create a bunch of savoriness, but to help catalyze browning. All of those amino acids in a lot of stuff that we associate with umami are like browning napalm. And so it helped get a really golden, beautiful crust. I will say if you took it one step further and you added something with active enzymes, so let's say you added some koji to your dough at a level of, 1 to 5% of the dough, through the proofing period, through the fermentation period, you might get some nibbling of whatever koji enzymes are left over on the proteins in your dough, which would yield probably more complex flavor, more browning, more savoriness, potentially even better binding of moisture in the crumb. Basically a shortcut to like some of the really amazing Bay Area super long fermented doughs that are basically using enzymes from microbes from the flours themselves to get to a similar point.
So it sort of sounds like, on a very basic level, adding something like soy sauce or some kind of liquid brown seasoning at the end of a dish, easy to get those top notes of umami or whatnot. Super simple. If you want to take it the next step further, what you were talking about in terms of putting it into the base, it's like when you first start cooking, like you said, putting that soy sauce into the dough. And then probably even further is harvesting those kind of, I'm going to use the wrong scientific terms, but like the microbes, cultivating those microbes and enzymes in there to build it.
And not just microbes and enzymes, but stuff that tastes really rich and deep. It's because you've taken these basic building blocks of food and blown them apart into a bunch of different pieces. Most seasonings that are umami based, the way you got there was by blowing some stuff apart and getting all these pieces. Imagine if you then add all of those already broken down, really reactive pieces, just simply to the beginning of a cooking process. If summer's coming and people are going to be like brining their corn, brine your corn with miso, brine your corn with like Maggi seasoning and stuff like that. And then when that goes on the grill, you've basically set a bunch of pieces in play for things to just go wild and to go into new and different directions. Because again, it's not always just about umami. One of the things that people most appreciate in plant-based cooking is complexity and things that don't just taste like a carrot, which a carrot can be great, but to find a deeper level, adding things earlier on in the process helps build up momentum chemically for just more diverse sets of taste, aroma, and color.
That is awesome. And I'm afraid we are out of time, but I feel like that is such a great place to end. Thank you so much, Ali. I also want to say that I think that hearing all of your metaphors for how umami works, if there's ever a food war, I feel like I want you on my side, given the mileage per chicken. Obviously, you have a sense for efficiency. Enzyme zombies, I think you mentioned, explosions of things. Like, you're going to be my military general. So thank you so much, Ali.
Thank you.
And I should mention to everyone also that Ali is going to be virtually signing copies of his book, Ingredient, Unveiling the Essential Elements of Food during the networking break in a little bit. So I know there are some questions we didn't quite get to. Feel free to hop in his booth and ask those questions to him. You can purchase the book in the booth and have him sign a virtual book plate to put in the book. Also, you can just go in there and ask him a question, or if you already have the book, he'll sign something and send it off to you so that you can put that in your book as well. So before we completely depart from the topic of umami, I feel like I got schooled a little bit on some of these umami things. Let's go back to the poll. Let's see if Ali's presentation has changed anything. Oh, it looks like still incorporating umami-rich ingredients, which I think Ali was advocating for as well, is still up there. So good job, everybody. I still think fermentation needs to get a little boost. So if anybody else is a fermentation fanatic, please jump in there in the polls. Alrighty. Now I'm delighted to welcome back Anne McBride, who's going to be moderating our next panel discussion around leveraging high-value ingredients. Anne is the program co-director for this series, and she is also the deputy director of the Torre Barra Mediterranean Center, a joint project of the Culinary Institute of America and the University of Barcelona. And she's joining us today from New Jersey, even though it looks like she's where I am, since we have the same background, but she's actually in New Jersey. Hi, Anne.
Hi, Jackie. We are a transcontinental operation.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Do we have a lot of gardeners with us today? I know, Jackie, you garden. Anyone else? Raise your hand in the chat, because if you've ever grown your own food and joined the many people responsible for seed shortages this year, you'll undoubtedly develop a real appreciation for the plant world and realize the insane amount of labor that growing food requires. And yet it's a challenge for chefs and operators to get their customers to understand why vegetables are not dirt cheap, pun intended, when diners still tend to equate value with the size and amount of animal protein on the plate. This panel of ingredients, storytelling, and menu crafting, how to showcase value around plants, will explore how chefs can mobilize such factors as novelty and cultural discovery, growing methods, history, and tradition to promote plant-forward dishes in a newly value-conscious operating environment. This is a short panel, so we'll take your questions throughout. So enter them in the chat panel on the right, and I'll incorporate them in the conversation. I'm delighted to be joined today by three incredible chefs and visionaries when it comes to produce, who have each made plant-forward menus the center of their creative and business model. From a wine bar in Portugal, to a farm restaurant in Michigan, to a fine dining restaurant and a burger shop in Manhattan. Stéphanie Audet is the chef owner of Senhor in Lisbon, Portugal. Abra Berens is the chef of Granor Farm in Galien, Michigan, author of the James Beard-nominated cookbook Roughage. And Amanda Cohen is the chef owner of Dirt Candy and author of the eponymous cookbook, and Lekka Burger in New York, and a true pioneer of plant-forward cooking. Welcome, Stéphanie, Abra, and Amanda, and thank you so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
This is a power panel for sure. So we'll start with a warm-up question, and this is not about your favorite or least favorite, but which vegetable is the one you find most interesting and why? Go ahead, Stéphanie.
I go?
You seem ready.
It's weird, but when I read the question today, I kind of want to say zucchini. I guess this is a question that like the answer change with the season and the years and your emotions. But I don't know, like zucchini could be so different the way you cut it or the way you cook it. Like if you steam it or grill it or roast or saute it with coconut oil, like it could have a totally different flavor. And I really like to play with it. And right now in Portugal, they're just getting super crunchy and super good. So yeah. How about you girls?
Personally, my favorite, or the one I'm always most fascinated by, is the onion. It's the backbone of almost every recipe. And at Dirt Candy, we actually use it in a lot of savory, sweet preparations as well. Sorry. So to me, it just spans sort of like that sweet, the savory, and like the zucchini, change the shape, you change the flavor. You can stuff it, slice it, eat it. Like literally so much comes out of it. And it's also really like unappreciated. Although I think now with this pandemic and everybody's growing scallions, I think we're starting to see the importance of onions.
Yeah, and I think for me, I've been thinking a lot lately about the like fava beans and chickpeas and things like that we're seeing used more and more in their green state, but then also in their shelling state and also in their as a dried pulse too, and kind of how it will change across the life cycle of that plant and how we as chefs can showcase the different attributes at different times of that plant's life.
So while Plant-Forward has become really hot in the last couple of years, it's nothing new for the three of you. You've been doing this a long time. What have you found has most resonated in terms of getting your customers to appreciate your food?
In my end, I think it always has been to like inspire people. If you inspire them like how to cook and how to recreate it, and like so that they could take control of their lifestyle and like try it at home, like to make it not an exclusive thing that you could only get when you go out to this restaurant, like to make it available to yourself, and that the customer comes back home and like, damn, I want to make this. I want to like, it's burning inside to like try it. Giving recipe, like I sell a lot of the cookbooks after people eat, and giving information. I explain the method and like sometimes I just give the recipe over the bar and I'm like, here, try this.
I think along those same lines, actually, having now run Dirt Candy for 11 years, and certainly when I started it, getting people to go out and eat vegetables was like mind-blowing. People were like, what? What am I doing here? Where's my steak? And what we really tried to do was make it really sort of accessible and non-elitist, and we used really basic vegetables, partially because of cost and partially because my original restaurant was so small that it was like funded and served by the corner deli, so I could only really use what they had. We had very few sort of exotic ingredients. But through that, we realized that what customers were most excited about were like really basic vegetables, but done in extraordinary ways, things that they could relate to, that they walked into the restaurant and they weren't like, well, I'm never going to eat this food again. This is so much pressure. What am I going to do? Instead, they were like, oh, this is what you did with the carrot. I love this idea. I want to go home and try it. And so along the very same lines as Stéphanie was saying.
Yeah, and I mean, very similar. I think I've benefited from both. I mean, so many people's work who's come ahead of me, and I think for us, because our dinner program is situated on our farm, which is a 10-acre working organic farm, I think it's kind of crystallizing some of those ideas about like what you can do with it, but then also regaining that connection with how things just look in the ground. 100 years ago, 30% or so of our population were farmers, and today it's about 3%. And I think one of the unintended consequences of that is that fewer and fewer people are interacting with farms and actually seeing produce being grown and what it looks like. And I know for me, when I started farming, I was so used to seeing rutabagas in the grocery store in the fall, especially in the northern Midwest. And then we grew them and I was like, oh man, there's so many greens with these, and like the root is just a tiny bit of that plant. And so I think people seeing what goes into it and then also really seeing it in as a crop state as opposed to an ingredient state has been really something they've latched onto.
Mm-hmm. I really love that.
Abra, I'm sorry. Does your customer like ask to go see the vegetables in the garden, and like are they like, I want to go out and
we do. Yeah, so we do a tour before the dinner. So people will arrive at the farm. They have the option to do a tour. It's about a half hour that goes through our barns and our growing spaces and talks about why there are hoop houses and why is it flooding sometimes? Why do the plants look like this some parts of the year? And then they land back in the farmhouse for a dinner that's based on what we grow. So we try to lead the tour around things that we know will be on the plate when they get to the farmhouse.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's fun.
We have a couple of audience questions, and actually the first two I got are kind of related. So Gino and Kristen are asking a version of, is there a plant-forward recipe that has the most success for introducing a change in heavy meat eaters to more plant-based diets? And the other question is, what would you recommend to start for a group of people who are meat-forward? What's your entry point vegetable? Or recipe?
We had sort of two lines along this at Dirt Candy. One is we try to make vegetables very decadent, because then people realize they're not going to miss out a lot. So probably our most iconic dish is probably our portobello mousse, which is what put us on the map. And people were like, ooh, it's like a pate. It's like a real pate. And it's all decadent and creamy and sensual. And so that really helps. The other one is we have our broccoli hot dogs. And so we put these on the menu maybe 7 years ago. They've come on and off since then. But it's a hot dog. It's a long stalk. It's the center stalk of broccoli with the floret at the top. And we smoke it and we grill it. And so we add all those flavors that you're accustomed to with like a hot dog or a hamburger. But you're eating it in the shape. And you're eating it in the shape of a long broccoli stalk, which is also the shape of a hot dog. And we put it in a bun, and it has mustard sauce and sauerkraut. And so you're eating the vegetable, but you kind of, if you close your eyes and squint, think you're eating a hot dog. And that's been really successful, especially with kids. They understand the flavors. And so the vegetables sort of become secondary, which seems like a trick, but you're getting them to eat the vegetable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We had a lot of people at Love when I was back in Montreal that are like, no vegetables, like super scared. And definitely, I think for them was the veggie burger that we had on the menu, the Love Burger that was made with the house lupini tempeh. And definitely I will recommend something filling for those people. Like if you give them a cucumber and kale salad and they come out and they're like, when I eat chicken or steak, I feel different. Like, eating plants is digested so differently. So I think it has to be, those people have to keep in mind to eat something that is filling. I think for me here at UVA, I like to recommend like mushroom. I think it goes along a little bit with Ali that was doing the presentation before, talking about umami, like mushroom. Cooked mushroom could have this like dense and earthy flavor that could help like resemble a bit meat, although I'm like never trying to reproduce the meat flavor, but I think it's satisfying, mushroom in general. So yeah.
And I think for me, it depends a little bit on the difference between a restaurant setting or a large institution setting and a home setting. But I'm a big believer in the best gateway vegetable is just vegetables, and just take the meat off the menu and don't give it as an option. And so then, especially like my dad is a real meat and potatoes guy, and my favorite thing to do is to go to his house and to cook. And then like maybe towards the end of the meal, he'll be like, wait a second, there wasn't any meat here. And I was like, yeah, no, there wasn't. Because there's so much diversity in plants and in vegetables that you can have so many of those different textures and flavors and colors that you'll find that there's nothing lacking. And so sometimes just by not giving a meat-based option is the easiest way for people to really understand that they can feel satisfied. And piggybacking off of what both Stéphanie and Amanda have said, like if it's filling, if it's decadent, if there's something different textures and colors that they're really fed and they don't feel like they're missing out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
because they're not.
Right?
Yeah.
We talked last week in the Mediterranean session about using olive oil, right, to build flavor, and that's obviously one technique. And this kind of low and slow cooking, the kind of food that you guys do is very different, but it has the same idea of how to really coax the best flavor out of whatever you're putting on the plate, right? And one question from Carol was, what is one cooked vegetable dish that you would make in a school cafeteria to interest high schooler? Carol, I hope that a broccoli hot dog is something you'll consider. Anything else in terms of a cooked vegetable dish that you would give high schoolers, or that you've successfully given high schoolers?
Cooking for high school.
Why not lasagna?
Lasagna.
Yeah, I was thinking eggplant
Like
parmesan or something like that, where you're getting some of those. I think that Amanda's point to really integrate other flavors that are familiar and then to take them to that place where people don't feel jarred by it is a smart way to go.
And then what plant-forward ingredient do you find to be the most forgiving or easiest to keep consistent? That's a really interesting question. Because that can certainly be a challenge for people, right? Like a cut of meat can be, you'll get the same cut of meat every time. A vegetable will be very different depending on when it is in the season, who's growing it, where it's grown.
Yeah. Well, maybe turnips or stuff like that, that it could be, like I got some last week that were so sweet, so good. And then I don't know where I got it directly from the farm. But if you get it in a grocery store that has it since I don't know how many months, and like that turnip could taste like so bitter and so old, and it could be really hard to play with it. I guess this is maybe not the safe bet, but cucumbers are always kind of fresh, easy. They're rarely, this one has so much more water than the other one. Like they're pretty straightforward.
Yeah, sort of adding to that, there's not a lot of vegetables I would say there's consistency with. I'm sure like from season to season there would be, but on a daily basis. And this is something I go through with my cooks all the time, which is taste the food, keep tasting it. I know it tastes different. I'm sure you didn't do anything different, but sometimes the vegetables that come in are very different. And so we need to modify how we're cooking them for that. And that's a really, that's a lifelong lesson that we're still going over in my kitchen every single day.
It will not stop.
Yeah. And I think too, I often find that if I'm replacing something that is consistent, like a cut of meat or eggs or something like that, replacing it with another plant-based protein, something that does have the texture, the consistency of dried beans or lentils or grains, then you're those seem like much more similar ingredients to me. And then you can still have those seasonal flourishes, and they tend to, not have the same issue with if you're in a larger institutional setting of how they're holding over a certain period of time, or that seasonality, they're really looking for something that doesn't come in and out in the same way as some of our favorite seasonal veg is probably a good place to start.
We have a couple of questions coming in on decadence, which also ties with one of the questions I had sent you guys in prep, in terms of restaurants are typically places where we go to escape, right? I mean, now and in the foreseeable future, it feels like that might be a little bit challenging. But so all three of your places offer that, this escape. And when I go to your places, I'm not hammered on messages to save the planet, right? And then as the restaurant evolve going, for the next year, who knows, right? We might go back to a time when people go out to dinner for decadent experiences and for indulgences, which in some cases might mean I don't want to give up my meat, or I want to have my meats there. So how do you address the expectation of decadent dining to include meats with a perceived value there? And relatedly, what makes a vegetable dish decadent?
Well, I think to not talk about it, not talk about the meat makes it decadent, and treat it like a dish that is a dish with meat or a dish with carrots, or if we treat them equally, like we have customers here at Senhor that are like, oh, is this a vegetarian restaurant? Like I have been here 5 times and I never noticed, because they're ordering this seasonal menu based on the farm produce, and they're like, okay, and then they're getting some stuff and it changes every time, and then it's good, and they don't realize that it's like, we don't have to glorify the vegetables and say this is a very special carrot, and like we could just say, hey, this is what the chef created today, and like, we just don't talk about it.
Yeah. Along the same vein, I think also it's always, and this is how it's always been for us, is it's always about what you can have, and we never talk about what you can't have. So, and to me, that what you can have is so much more than what you can't have. Like there's no discussion, oh, you can't have some steak, but look at all the different kinds of carrots I can give you. Like there's always so much more I can offer you. So that's how we've really tried to like sell the place. Like, yes, I mean, we don't even say, yes, you can't have it, but understanding that sort of part of that question is, look at how much we can give you. Look at how much there is for you to have here.
Yeah, and Granor is a sort of a unique setting because it's banquet style and it's 7 courses. And so everybody's eating the same thing. And so the way that we handle that is that same way of really presenting a bounty. And so that people are moving through a similar arc of a tasting menu, but that is primarily vegetarian. And a lot of times, because we've now made it a space where people who are vegetarian or vegan who have special diets come to, meat is almost always served on the side. So we'll have a complete, like, I think one of my favorite courses we did last winter was these slow ember roasted sweet potatoes with black beans and a kohlrabi slaw. And then on the side, there was some pulled pork that were in smaller dishes. It's totally an accent to it. And I think it was funny because the tables are really long and people are passing things around, and the pork didn't actually move around as the other platters did. And so I think it is about, decadence can both be in terms of richness and, you know, feeling full and satiated, but also in just that sheer quantity, like Amanda was saying, of, you know, all the things that are available and the different flavors you get to move through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point, that the aesthetics and the experience as a whole can create this similar satisfaction and this effect of specialness, right? It's not that you need a sizzling piece of meat to feel that now you've truly celebrated your anniversary.
Right.
We have a question from Greg, who's asking, how do you think about hitting certain menu price points with plant-forward cooking and creating value for money?
So that's a really tough question because I think this is probably the biggest issue. Well, not the biggest one, I think. Obviously, there's a pandemic right now. But in general, I think, getting people to understand how much plants and good food costs, plant food costs, but also understanding how much labor goes into it. So it is an incredibly labor-intensive kind of cuisine, and we have an open kitchen at Dirt Candy, so everybody can see how much staff is there, and they're always like, "Oh, you have so many members in your kitchen," and then they'll, like, in the same breath, they'll be like, "Ooh, this meal is so expensive." I'll be like, "Yes." And they'll be like, "Ooh, but it's so pretty, and there's all these tiny little cuts," and you're just like, connect the dots.
Right.
But it is something that we struggle with, and something that actually coming out of this quarantine period that I have committed to charging more. Because I do think that there's a lot more value in what we do, and we haven't charged enough, and that will be a lot of consumer education, not just on my part, but hopefully all the food journalists out there who can now also commit to starting to educate people about the actual cost of food.
Yeah, and I think it's a real opportunity, like a weird, terrible opportunity that we have to talk about this. I think we have seen at our farm so many people for the first time being interested in signing up for a CSA, or, you know, lining up down the block to get into the farm stand to buy produce. And so I think there is this emphasis on it. And simultaneously, to hear the stories of farmers that are having to till under lettuce because suddenly the large institution market is gone or their wholesale market is gone. I think people are hearing this. And again, getting back to that connection of that we've lost of how food is grown and how people experience it. I think that restaurants like all three of ours are really trying to tighten that gap. And I think people are ready to hear it in a way. I feel like Americans at least have gotten a crash course in the very shallow flaws in, you know, just under the surface flaws and problems in our food system. And so I think Amanda's dead right. You know, we need to charge more for plant-based protein. And how do you convey that value? Because it's fucking good food. And that's how you do it. Sorry, I swear some. And so, you know, I think it's going to be a hard conversation, and there's always a point about access with that. And I think that that's a valid conversation, but also a slightly different one. And that if we spend the least amount of money of our disposable income on food than we have since the 1920s, it has to cost more.
Yeah. I think everybody used to say, "Oh, I can make this at home. I can do this at home." And I'm like, "I've seen your Instagram meals. You would not make this at home."
Yeah. Totally.
I think people are going to come out of this international crisis with a different way to look at things. Like, I think what was hurting this matter before was like the comparison of like someone coming like, "Ooh, it was really expensive for a plate of hummus and a glass of wine, of natural wine. It cost like 10 euros. And then I get so much for 10 euros at McDonald's, you know." It's like this comparison could not happen at all. So I think people now had time to say, okay, what's going to happen with our money? What's going to happen with the way we use it? And I think hopefully they're using it more wisely and understand the work in the field that you guys do at the farm and the work that we do in the restaurant. And that, yes, we have 6 people because we have to cut this thing every day again, and we cannot prep it for 5 days because it needs to be fresh. So yeah, I think people are going to spend their money wisely from now on, more than before this COVID crisis.
Yeah, I agree. But and I'm wondering though, what is so obviously panels like that, what, you know, your Instagram accounts, the ways you're communicating can share some of that, but it's still hard to get people to understand why they should be paying more. And Amanda, this is a discussion we've had a lot, and you know, you've talked about that at other CIA conferences, for example. So for people who in the audience who might be just at the beginning of that journey, what's the most effective strategy you have found that really, even if people don't get it 100%, it gets them like, I don't know, 80% there, 85%, 90% there. What's the best advice you can give to someone in terms of this is how you get your customers to understand why they need to pay what they're paying?
You have to talk to them. I mean, that's be willing to not necessarily sit down, but basically sit down with them and have a discussion and really explain in really honest terms why something is so expensive. And, you know, partially for us at the restaurant, and people will talk about how expensive the restaurant is. And I'm always like, you're not really paying for the food. But the food, unfortunately, is one of my smallest costs here. I have a lot. I'm in New York City. I have rent. I have this. You really like toilet paper in the bathroom. But and so when you start to break down, I do think people actually start to get it, and how a vegetable restaurant has the exact same cost as a meat restaurant, and the cost between buying a piece of meat and a crate of vegetables, the difference is slight. And that the reality is there's so many other costs that we pay for in the restaurant, and people do start to get it. It just, you know, it takes a couple of conversations.
Mm-hmm.
For us as well, we really base it on human contact, and I think we have a staff of very passionate people that understand. I say passionate, but not annoying. Like, hey, have you heard about plant food cuisine? It's more like willing to comfortably share whatever the person is willing to receive. And it's also an experience. Like Amanda said, you don't just pay for the food, you pay for the whole ambience, the wines you get, and like everything combined together. And we have started to put on our Senhor menu, we have like a little story at the beginning about this is our mission, this is our goals. It's our menu. You need it. Like it's so small, but anyway. And at the back, we like say thanks to our suppliers and the farms we work with, and like people that are in this mindset, and they're like, hey, I'm open to learn more about this, and being not forced to like read something, or the server is like, hey, let me tell you about this story and our producers, and it's like, hey, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, just make sure I'm comfortable, my experience as well, and then I get to read this whenever my friend's at the bathroom, and then I'm like, oh, that's actually really cool, I'm having fun, I'm taken care of, and then I ask the server that could go more deep into the matter if the person is willing to. Yeah, I think human to human.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that, because we have a lot of operators watching who work in high volume settings, but that's the kind of things that you can do also in those kind of environments with posters. And if you go to Sweet Green, for example, there are a lot of displays about their producers and everything. So this kind of communication. And then all three of you have amazing cookbooks also. Stéphanie, I think yours might only be available in Canada because I've been tracking it down, but
It's on Amazon apparently,
Okay.
but it's only in French.
So we are unfortunately out of time, but we're going to go to a demo with Abra. Amanda, you'll be back with us next week. And then Stéphanie, I hope that you'll hang out during the break and you can interact with some of our attendees at that point. So thank you so much, Stéphanie and Amanda.
Sure.
And Abra, we're now going to watch a culinary demo you prepared for us. So can you tell us in a few words what you'll be doing?
Yeah, so for me, I think really structurally, and then like to kind of change what's hanging on the structure. So when I think about a dish going from, low price point to high price point, how does that sort of evolve, especially if you're using some of the same ingredients? And so the demo is just sort of an extrapolation of that, how to take a low price point side of carrots and then scale it up to a larger, higher price point entree portion or entree sort of setting on a menu.
Great. That sounds really fascinating. And I'm looking forward to seeing the demo. You'll also see during the demo, Abra uses an Arzak egg, and you can find a video for that particular element of a dish on our Instagram account at CIA Industry Leadership. So there's a video there from a couple of days ago. You can find the recipes at plantforwardkitchen.org. And if you have questions, you can ask them in the book signing booth during the break. So thank you, Abra, and let's watch your demo.
So this demonstration is about how to take a vegetable dish and really change the price point so that you're earning more from it without having to add a lot of animal protein to it or other expensive things to it. And the way that I think about this a little bit is sort of where it fits on your menu. So in a very classic steakhouse sort of environment where you're really paying for big ass lobster and real thick steaks and blah, 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 you get these side dishes that are just a single vegetable and they're usually really inexpensive. So that could be something like a dish of roasted carrots, very simply plated. In this case, there's 4 different colored carrots. They've just been tossed with some olive oil, salt and pepper, and roasted in a hot oven. So that's a side of carrots that I would charge probably, $4 for in a steakhouse scenario, $4 to $5. If you wanted to gussy it up a little bit, so it doesn't look just like that, maybe there's a little sprinkle of some dukkha or, microgreens make everything look fancier. So there you go. That's your side of carrots. With those little additions, I still probably wouldn't charge much more than $5 for it. And this is where most vegetables have occupied space on traditional restaurant menus until we're starting to change that conversation. So the next steps of this, we're going to talk through the ways to take the same plate of carrots and scale it up to be a higher price point, mid-size share plate, and then a full course meal. So this is our $4 side of roast carrots with some frilly microgreens to set it up. We're going to transition these carrots to become a higher price point share plate, maybe a mid-course or a starter on a different style menu. So taking it from the side dish and making its own standalone course. So to do that, we're literally just going to put these onto a slightly larger plate. Obviously, plates change how dishes are presented, how they're thought about by the guest. So now we've got the same amount of carrots on the plate. And what it needs is just a little bit more to go with it. Something a couple of garnishes that are a little bit more than just a smattering of chopped herbs or microgreens, but are really not taking away from the vegetable as the star of that plate. So what we've got here, this is our cilantro peanut relish. This is very simple, just peanuts blitzed up. You could bash them with a rolling pin or a frying pan, cilantro, salt, just something that's going to be a little bit of lime, real tangy and wonderful over it. And that's going to give a really nice contrasting texture to the creaminess of those roasted carrots. So we're just going to dot that over liberally. And then also some of our whipped ricotta. So this is really just ricotta It's been whipped up with a little bit of cream and lemon zest, so you get kind of that nice firm paste. And just gonna dot it over the carrots. So this is providing some sort of value added sense, as well as a little bit of creaminess that's gonna contrast those carrots. It also is a temperature difference. So the ricotta is gonna be nice and cold, the carrots warm, and then the peanut relish is room temperature. Maybe we'll do a little smattering more of the peanut relish. Do a little bit of the oil around the side. Something that's gonna make it feel like it's a standalone item. And if you feel like that's not enough for your restaurant to charge, I would charge probably $9 to $11 for this, depending on the, husbandry of the carrots. But you could also always add a little bit more volume and give it some height, maybe. And then go over it again with just a bit more of that relish. And so you've gone from the single platter of carrots to a full starter that's going to have some weight to it, has textural and temperature differences, and just feels like a more composed thing than our cast off side. So now we're going to take that same platter of carrots and really turn it into something that can stand alone as a main course on any sort of menu against other meatier entrees. I think that in order to make that transition for a lot of guests, they still need something a little bit more. We're used to having that star of the plate. We don't quite have that with just the vegetables as they are. So, I'm a big fan of plant-based proteins that are still plants. So these are black beans that have been cooked with a little bit of paprika and cumin and chili flake. So that's going to be what's probably like a 4-ounce portion of black beans down. And then we're going to add a little bit of a cabbage salad, again, to give kind of a secondary crunch and texture. And cabbage and beans are just so nice together. So this is just red cabbage, been dressed with a little bit of olive oil and salt. Make a little pile next to that. And then we're going to lift these carrots from this course that we've already built right into the center. So again, it's about the carrots, the beans and the cabbage, and eventually the egg are going to be just in a supporting role. So we still have the dairy. You could certainly take that off. It's not necessary. Build up that center. And that to me is a complete meal. That is a full-size entree that I would be happy to receive, where you're getting lots of protein, lots of texture and different temperatures, things like that. Truth be told, there's still a lot of times people who need some sort of an animal protein, and eggs are by far the most sustainable protein that we can produce that is animal-based. So this is our Arzak cooked egg. You could certainly replace it with a fried egg or a poached egg of any sort. And I'm just going to nestle this straight onto the top. That gives us back that star of the plate that a lot of times people are craving and really looking for. But without adding a ton of weight or volume, it's certainly not, a big ribeye that's going over the top. And then maybe we'll do just a little bit more of the cilantro peanut relish over the top to tie it all together. And that's your main course. So this is how a little small side of carrots can really evolve into several different types of dishes, culminating with a full meal that I would be happy to pay entree prices for.
Thank you so much, Abra, for this demo that was not only featuring delicious dishes, but really broke down for us how to increase the value of a dish and what you can charge for it in a restaurant setting. We hope that you all got some great ideas of how you might similarly transform some elements of your own menus. And clearly, this is the kind of things you can do no matter what the format or the scale of your operation is. And it might even be a wise strategy to follow right now when supply chains are fragile, to build a series of dishes around ingredients that you can obtain in a way that still offers options from a flavor perspective, but also helps you build those margins on those dishes. We are going on a networking break now, sponsored by the Mushroom Council. And if you're joining us for the second time, you know that you get a recipe every Monday. So this week, the recipe was spicy blended mushroom and beef smash slider. I hope you all made it as part of this break sponsored by the Mushroom Council. We have a range of ways for you to engage with everyone who is also attending today. And if any of you need a speed dating question when you're doing networking, we didn't get to Kristen's question in the previous panel, but it was really great. And so I'll give it to you as a point of departure for discussion if you need it. What mistakes have you seen places make when they attempt to go plant forward? What piece of advice would you give before they start? So feel free to chat about that with the people you'll meet. So the networking break will feature themed discussion tables in addition to a cooking demo from the National Peanut Board, which you can access via the sessions button on the left of your screen. Networking will allow you to chat one-on-one with another attendee for just 3 minutes. So commitment phobics, no need to worry. Give it a shot. Think of it as a chat you'll have when you're reaching for coffee at Copia, because attendees who participated last week really enjoyed that. During the Sponsor Expo, you can visit the booth of our wonderful sponsors, and there are new ones every week. So the sponsors are making it possible to offer this program at no cost to you. So thank you for supporting them. We have 2 book signings, as you've heard, one with Ali Bouzari and the other one with Abra Berens. You can purchase the books through the links provided. You chat with them, and then you'll get a book plate in the mail. Even if you already have their books, go say hello, get a book plate to put in your own copy. And by participating in the networking activities, you'll be entered in a raffle to win some cool prizes like books from our presenters and registration to next year's conference. So we encourage you to participate in as many of these activities as possible in the spirit of community and sharing that is always central to the CIA conferences. And if you participate every week of our 5-week series, you'll be entered in a raffle to win free registration and travel to next year's conference in Napa. And last week's winner are an operator from Sonoma State University who won free registration, Jeffrey Mayer, who won Dani Olivella's Catalan cookbook, and Bo Perry, who won Kyle Connaughton's Donabe cookbook. We also have a new poll open for you, so click on the right. We'll love to hear your thinking around bringing new ingredients and products in your kitchen in the coming months. So let us know what you're thinking and go see what other operators are thinking. So go ahead, enjoy the break. We'll see you back on stage in 20 minutes with a panel featuring chefs and operators from the CIAFSR Plant-Forward watch list featured in the current issue of the magazine. Enjoy.